Poelstra, core developer for Bitcoin, member of the Blockstream team here at MoneroCon. And well, there's a lot to talk about. And so you were telling us that you're mostly a BTC maximalist, correct?
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization. What I care about is cool technology. But what I care about, more than coolness, probably is robustness. What I like about Bitcoin that basically no other currency has, no other cryptocurrency has, is that it's much more scalable. And that's funny, people like to complain about Bitcoin, it's not scalable, because there are these limits in play. There's a 4 mega weight block size limit. Right. There are limits on how many signatures you can put in a transaction, yada, yada, yada. The thing with Bitcoin, though, is that you can download the blockchain and you can verify it on some laptop that you bought from Walmart, and it will take a couple of hours. It's not really going to interrupt your work unless you're doing like heavy graphics design and you need your full CPU and stuff. And then you can be assured that your view of the blockchain is the actual view of the blockchain. And this will continue to be the case going forward because the rate of growth of the Bitcoin blockchain increases. Well, it increases linearly with the length of time that the network has been going. And that's unfortunate, and that eventually I suppose will happen. But it's not growing faster than that. And that's something that a lot of other currencies, for example Monero, have a problem with. Where in Monero there is there's an accumulator, this collection of every single output that's ever existed in any Monero transaction is put into this giant bin, basically called an accumulator. And when you spend coins in Monero, you reach into the bin, you grab like 11 of them. You're actually only spending one, but you grab 11 and say, I'm spending one of these 11. And nobody can tell which of the 11 you're spending. And so from the point of view of a verifier, you can't get rid of any of those. You've got all 11 have to go back in the bin. And then all of the new outputs that your transaction creates, they go into the bin as well. So every transaction increases the set of state that somebody verifying the chain has to, and it permanently increases that state. And that is something that doesn't really exist in that sense in Bitcoin.
Okay.
In Bitcoin, the historic blockchain data will keep increasing forever at that rate, but you don't need the historic data to validate new blocks. All you need to know is a set of unspent transaction outputs, and transactions that spend those outputs, they destroy those outputs and create new ones.
Okay, so SegWit removes the chain of digital signatures, puts it into an extended block?
No. So in SegWit, all of the signatures continue to be in the block. They continue to be in the transaction. There's no separation like that. What SegWit separates is what position in the Merkle tree the signatures occupy versus the rest of the normative transaction data.
Okay.
So, and this is all still on the same original block. And when you serialize the block, you'll still see all of exactly the same data. You'll still see a transaction followed by a signature, a transaction followed by a signature, and so on and so forth. And if you try to validate a block without the signatures, it won't work. It will continue, it will fail. There's no removal of the requirement the transactions be signed or anything like that. So
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. The only difference is when you're computing this object in the block header called the what is it called? I forget the name, but there's a Merkle root of all the transactions in the header. The way that's computed, traditionally you would take a full transaction, all the full transactions, you would hash each one of them up, and then you'd hash them in pairs, you'd hash those pairs in pairs, and then so on when you get to the bottom. And now that we have SegWit, what you do is you pull out some of the what's called witness data, which includes the signatures and some extra data showing how to order the signatures and stuff like that. You put those into their own tree, you hash those up, and so you're still putting all the same data into the tree. All the same data is committed, and it's in the same spot in the block header, but the way that tree is arranged is different.
Okay, so the way you're explaining it then, you would say definitely that the chain of digital signatures still exists within SegWit transactions?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. The rules for what constitutes a transaction remain the same, and the rules for what constitutes a valid transaction remain the same. The signatures are still there. Okay,
great. So, when we talk about Bitcoin, BTC, we can look at its extrinsic contingencies of its economic framework. So, for instance, having the ETF, the BACT, coming into play, Wall Street coming into play. Or these are extrinsic to activity happening on chain. Now, my question to you is in regards to probable future economic pressure, especially come May 21st, 2020, come the halving. Do you see any economic pressure happening within the chain's infrastructure?
What a cool question.
It's kind of a loaded question, but that's a question that, like I was telling you earlier, right? My personal definition of Bitcoin is that I see it as a network of miners.
Yeah.
Right. So let's start here. What is your definition of Bitcoin? If you were to just...
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I think I would disagree strongly with this characterization of a network of miners. So let me start by clarifying what I see miners' role in the ecosystem is, and then I'll try to give a more encompassing definition of Bitcoin. So what Bitcoin blocks have is a proof of work attached to them. And this is a sort of independent cryptographic object that is very expensive to produce. It takes on average 10 minutes of work of all the miners in the ecosystem producing this. And what this gives blocks is, first of all, it rate limits them, so that rather than having a situation where everybody is producing their own blocks and publishing them to the network, and nobody can tell which block is the canonical one, it creates a situation, or even like which blocks exist is the first question we have to ask. Like which block even are there? And if everybody's making blocks and streaming them across the network, there would just be this whole mess. Everybody would have a different view. We wouldn't have consensus. So the first thing that the proof of work does is it limits the production rate of blocks and ensures that reasonably quickly, like long before the block time is up, everybody has a view of what blocks exist, what blocks have extended the tip. And for miners, this is important so they know which blocks to extend. But for validators, it's also important so they know their view of the network matches what other people see. And the second thing that proof of work does is it makes it very expensive to replace blocks.
Right.
And then that, in conjunction with the block reward, which consists of the block subsidy and then also transaction fees, incentivizes miners to extend the blockchain rather than going back and trying to extend the earlier versions of the blockchain.
Right.
And so this means, as a user of the system, when I create a transaction and it gets into a block, once it's in that block, I can estimate the cost to produce that block and say, well, it will cost at least that much to remove this transaction from the chain. And then every additional block that piles onto that, I can say, well, now it'll cost like the sum of that much, the sum of that much. And the cost to reverse a transaction continues to increase monotonically as more blocks and more proof of work are piled onto this. And that's kind of the finality property of Bitcoin transactions. But the way that I see that is that it's a crucial component of the Bitcoin network. It's really it's what makes it work when it just wouldn't work without it. But that's true of a lot of components of the Bitcoin network. And the way that I see Bitcoin, rather than being about the proof of work and about the mining network, which is how we get these finality and consensus properties, I see Bitcoin as being a distributed ledger. What I mean by that is that all the users of the system own their own coins. So everybody comes to agreement on the state of the chain. What that state is, technically, is the UTXO set, the unspent transaction output set.
Yes.
What that represents, a giant list of outputs, meaning an amount and a spending condition. So it's like amount, spending condition, amount, spending condition, amount, spending condition. And what those spending conditions typically look like is a coin might say, I cannot be spent except by signing with this cryptographic key. And that key will be something that is controlled solely by an individual. So the way that I see Bitcoin is as a cryptographically enforced bearer instrument, where control of coins corresponds to control of cryptographic material, and the control of cryptographic material is with individual users of the system. And when they produce transactions, when they spend their coins, they're exercising that control. They don't need to ask any intermediaries, they don't need to ask permission for that. If they control the cryptographic material, they can produce a transaction and publish it. they're using their control over their coins to transfer it into control of another party. And again, there's no intermediaries there. It's just a direct person-to-person or peer-to-peer, business-to-business, whatever transfer. And I see the proof-of-work system and the mining network as enabling that, but it's almost like an implementation detail. What's critical to me about Bitcoin is that it's a cryptographically enforced bearer system.
So yeah, that's why it's really good to talk with people that have different perspectives. And no, I mean it makes a logical sense what you're saying. Let me ask you a question regarding mining as the asset that is invested upon within Bitcoin that is the least liquid of assets within the Bitcoin economy. The example of this would be, let's say you run a mining farm, you own Bitcoin, and you have a Bitcoin startup, right? And let's say something were to happen within the market that forces you to withdraw your affiliation with Bitcoin for whatever reason, because the market's crashing or whatever. You can pivot your company to something in fintech. You can sell your coin as it's dropping, but your mining equipment in itself commits you more as an investor. So in a sense, the miner signals to the network that his degree of investment in a sense is higher than those who just have a business as their own coin. So it seems that's almost that within the game theory of what the market drivers are, the miners being those whose incentive is to secure the network. It would follow that to me, I've always seen it almost as if they play a bigger role than what they've been playing in the past, and they just haven't actualized that role. So there's like that. Are they the bouncers of our club? That they don't own the club, but they're the bouncers enforcing who gets in and who gets out? Or are the miners the owners of the club while being the bouncers? You know, and that's kind of like I have no answer to that. Okay. Like, I see your perspective, but there's a point where I have to step back and say, well, then it comes down to two things: guided crypto governance or complete competition, where you just let the market decide who's how things are to function. And if we allow the market to decide, I would think the miners have more at stake, quote unquote.
So let me try to. So you said like a lot of different things, and I wrote.
Sure.
So let's try to. So the first thing I want to address is your description of miners as bouncers in the network.
Yeah.
And when I hear the word bouncer, I think of like being censored, deciding which transactions get in, which transactions don't. And to the extent that miners have,
how many people can they allow into, how many?
Okay. Yeah. Let me go even before that. When we talk about miners being responsible for securing the network, and enforcing the rules of the network, that is not miners' job. Miners' job is to do the computational work to produce a proof of work. The rules of the network require that there be, first of all, a valid block, and secondly, a valid proof of work on there. But as a miner, if you do the second without the first, if you take an invalid block, let's say it has too many transactions in it, or has invalid transactions, or if you even create an invalid proof of work, maybe you're hashing things wrong or something like that, that block will simply be rejected by the network. As a miner, you don't have control over the rules of the network. In principle, I mean, you don't even have to be verifying the rules of the network, although you're really gambling them, because then if you build an invalid block, that's going to waste a lot of power. But the job of securing the network, that falls to the individual users and the participants of the network. And that's when you can go back to when I was talking about Bitcoin as a cryptographically enforced bearer instrument. Part of being cryptographically enforced, I kind of wave my hands up, who's doing the cryptographic enforcement? The answer is the individuals who are verifying the state of the chain, like you as an individual can download the blockchain and verify each transaction happened in the order that it did and that there are no bad signatures or anything. And that means any stakeholders in the system, anybody who cares about the system working correctly, meaning anybody using the system who cares about whether or not they actually control the funds they believe they control, is able and should be validating the rules of the system. So the miner's job is not securing the network in that sense. And to the extent that they are securing the network, it's almost like vacuous, because the validation they're doing they need to be doing, otherwise they might be producing invalid blocks. And if they don't do that validation, it's not that the network won't be secured, it's just that their blocks will be invalid and they'll be just burning cash. And so this sort of leads us into, could you consider miners to be bouncers? And there's one sense in which they kind of do this, because miners choose which transactions to put into their blocks. Generally they do this by ordering them by fee rate. The rules of the network say they can only fit so many transactions, and there's a lot of back pressure of transactions, and they just choose the transactions that will earn them the most profit. And so this is correct working of the system. This is how the fee market works. This is how transactions are chosen. But because because the fee market dynamics are not cryptographically enforced, they're not part of the system that you can verify miners are doing. It gives miners the technical ability to be censoring transactions. And that, when I hear the word bouncer, I worry that you're talking about that. And that's very dangerous. To the extent that it's possible for miners to distinguish between different transactions and therefore censor different transactions, depending if they don't like, for example, financial regulations in their jurisdiction, maybe you're unsatisfied, or you're either having pressure from their local banks or from their business partners or from their governments or whatever. That's a very serious problem. And that's, I feel, a bug in the system. And we could talk about that. We'd have to get into different privacy technologies and privacy scalability trade-offs and stuff like that. But before I do that, there was another thing you said that I've now forgotten.
That's okay. Yeah. No, I mean, no, that makes everything you're saying makes a lot of sense, and I think it's very important to define what it is within crypto, within BTC, that when we talk about consensus. We hear this word consensus a lot, right? Jameson Lopp has a whole write-up on how consensus is achieved through BTC. Maybe if you can go through that really quick for our subscribers, for everyone learning about this right now.
Sure. Yeah. So let me just start from the perspective. You say a new user of the system, and they want to learn what is the state of the Bitcoin network. And importantly, and maybe your audience is very different from other forms of assets. Cryptocurrencies are very unique and historically unique in this respect. There's no authority to say what the state of the Bitcoin network is. There's no central issuer. There's no foundation. There's no collection of people whom you can go to and say hey, what's the state of the ledger? Did you sign off on this? And if somebody else disagrees, then they're wrong, kind of thing. Here, every participant is more or less on equal footing when it comes to deciding the validity, the current state of the chain. At least in a technical perspective. Economically, things are complicated. But from a technical perspective, there's no authority. So instead, the way that this works is that you, as a user, connect to the network. You connect to a whole bunch of peers. You ask them, say, what is the most worked blockchain that you see? And then we be here. So the way, there's a simpler term people like to use.
Are these miners, or are these just everyday users?
Everyday users. You just connect to a bunch of different nodes on the network, and they will tell you the state of the chain. So the individual blocks are produced by miners, but then storing them and propagating them and validating them, that's the function of nodes.
Correct, yes. What we would call a full node, and there's a distinction between a full node and a mining node, and some people would say that a mining node doesn't have to be... there's different definitions as to what that is, right? But we're talking about full nodes that are not mining nodes. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But they could be mining nodes. We could talk maybe mining nodes. If you ask if mining nodes need to do certain validation, that's a trade-off as a miner between you spending the time and energy to verify things versus you wasting a bunch of work. And that's not something that really has consequences for the rest of the network, at least to first order. But so you as a user, you connect to the network, you find there's several thousand publicly available full nodes. There are a lot of other ones that are not publicly available, so maybe if you have a trusted connection to somebody who you think has a better view of the network, or at least a different view, in another continent, you can connect Blockstream on the satellite service. You can add that as one of your nodes. You get the block streaming from the satellite. Then you ask all these nodes, what is the most worked chain? What is the longest chain? Technically, I should say most worked, not longest. So there's a subtle distinction there that's probably not too important for this level of discussion. These nodes will reply like, oh, here's the best work block that I see, and here is a chain of block headers. And this is kind of cool. And the first thing you do is you download the chain of block headers and learn, like, are these guys telling the truth about what the longest blockchain is? And what's cool about these headers is they're 80 bytes each. They're extremely small. They are like smaller than like half a tweet. So a quarter of a tweet now.
That's awesome.
Is the size of a block header.
That's really cool.
So while there are several 100,000 of them, we're now at like block 550,000 or something. 550,000 times 80 bytes each is still not a tremendous amount of data. It's like between 50 and 80 megabytes. So you download this, you can then verify the proof of work, which took many years and a tremendous amount of money to produce. And you can get, assuming that you have enough connection and an accurate view of the network, and here's where like the trust distribution of nodes become important, then you can be assured that you actually know what the longest chain is, just the chain of headers. At that point, you can then start connecting to nodes, and hey, what are the actual blocks here? Okay, I have these 80-byte headers, but I need to know the transactions. And what's cool is that the headers actually cryptographically commit to the transactions. So now nobody can lie to you about the transactions. So you can go, like at this point you get the headers from however you're doing it. At this point you can go to like Blockstream satellite and download the transactions, and you could hate Blockstream. You could not trust us at all. And the thing is, if you know the headers, we are unable to lie to you about the transaction. The best we can do is just not give them to you.
That's beautiful. I mean, that's the whole point of Bitcoin. That's the whole point of all is that we can have adversaries work within a trustless environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you join the network, you first get this consensus view, and what you get consensus on is just this chain of 80-byte headers. And then once you've got those, then we switch from the part of the system that involves mining and mining incentives and then kind of the difficult economic questions and the difficult connectivity and distributed trust questions, and the rest is just cryptography. And that's like technically more complicated, but conceptually much simpler, because it just comes down to like, you don't have to worry if I'm lying to you because I can't lie to you, right? You don't have to worry that no, they're lying to you about what transactions are in blocks. They just can't lie to you, because when you receive the transaction, you hash them up. You compute this Merkle tree, however you do. Before SegWit, you would just like do the hash of full transactions. As I said, after SegWit, there's two hashes, but they combine at the bottom. And then you check if the resulting hash matches what's in the header. And that's right. If it matches, you're good. If it doesn't match, like yes, someone's lying to you. And once you have the transactions, you can individually verify those transactions. It comes down to the same sort of thing. You want to verify the digital signatures in all of the transactions. And that again is a cryptographic question. I can't give you a fake signature. Like that's what it means to be a digital signature. I can't forge one. Either the signatures are valid, and then the transaction is valid, and then the block is valid, or they're not, and then nothing is valid, and you've got to just throw away that blockchain and find a different one.
For entrepreneurs, investors, and programmers that are looking to get into Bitcoin, BTC, and where are they to go to? I mean, so this is one thing that a complaint that I've heard is that the Lightning Network became, you've maybe heard this, an innovation funnel, right? Right, wrong, or indifferent, it doesn't matter. The truth is that the community has decided to scale in a certain way, and that certain way is at the point where the community has hedges bet that that's the best way to move forward, and the community needs to keep going in that direction, right? The question that I had is, where do you recommend people to look at? If you're talking to a programmer we have a lot of programmers that watch this show, we have a lot of investors and entrepreneurs that want to rush in. Where do they go? There's a lot of FUD out there that maybe the Lightning Network is still a moving target, right? Some people would say that even BTC on the on-chain development itself is also a moving target, with like the proposals like from Luke Dasher of going back to 300 kilobytes, actually going there, we never know, but reducing the block size and all that. Like, where do you go? Where do you go if you're talking to a guy that maybe has the same technical experience as you, right?
So
coming in, where does he go? What does he do?
So first of all, Luke Jasher's proposal is not going to go anywhere. Okay, he's going to be mad at me for saying that, for being so definitive about it. But there just simply isn't community support for that. Regardless of whether I like it, I kind of like it in principle, but like it's not.
Well, I'm a big blocker. People know I've been more advocate of big blocks, and when I watch his talk on the conference at the Magical Crypto Friends,
MCC.
Assuming that his premises are correct, he makes logical. It's logical. And I'm a big blocker, and people know I'm a big blocker. Like, assuming that his premises are correct, it seems reasonable from his perspective, right?
It seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Although it would make the network harder to use, and there's certainly a trade-off there. And I feel like maybe if we could go back and have never gone past 300 kilobyte blocks, maybe it would seem more reasonable. I think reducing the block size, I think, sends the wrong message to people trying to use the network. I think that it would just cause so much turmoil within the ecosystem, and I think that's the sense that a lot of people get from this proposal. But moving away from Luke's proposal to more generally, you commented about the Bitcoin consensus layer being kind of a moving target, and it's true. It's true certainly that Bitcoin is moving much faster than normal traditional assets are, and it's moving very fast for something that is a consensus system where every single participant needs to agree on the rules.
Well, just look at how the chain has mutated, and now we have forks, right? That are, to one degree or another, trying to compete within, even compete in enticing miners from BTC to mine that chain, those BCH and BSV. But the reality is that BTC is winning right now. The market is saying BTC is the longest proof of work chain.
So what's nice about forks is that you can ignore them. So Bitcoin by definition is the longest proof of work valid chain. And Bitcoin Cash, for example, is simply not valid according to the rules of Bitcoin. So it wouldn't matter if the Bitcoin Cash chain was longer in terms of the number of blocks. It wouldn't matter if it was longer in terms of most work. But there's one distinction between longer and most work.
Right.
Is that Bitcoin Cash is, I believe it's many thousands of blocks longer than the Bitcoin chain, but it has far less proof of work on it.
So there goes my question, right? As an investor, as a future entrepreneur, you are not looking, when you come into something new, right? Let's say you're a huge corporation trying to come into crypto, right? You're not thinking about the present value and what's presently available. You're looking into the future and saying, well, what's my future value? What's the future value of my investment? And for that, the research and development has to take into a lot of factors, right?
So, yeah. But first off, if you're speculating on the assets here, I really have no advice.
No, it's not about speculating. It's more like maybe give your perspective on the FUD about BTC,
sure. The FUD
of the moving target thing.
So the first thing is we spent a little while talking about how the Lightning Network is like the way that the community has decided to scale, and if you want to be scaling, you have to get on board with that. That's not really true, in the sense that Bitcoin is a permissionless system. If you have another scaling solution, then you're welcome to go pursue that. If your scaling solution involves changing the consensus rules of the network, you're going to meet a lot of opposition and have a very difficult time. And I would strongly advise you trying to build a business model around changing the consensus rules of Bitcoin, or of anything, but Bitcoin is probably by far the most difficult chain for you to attempt a business model around that. And then if you want to be doing second layer things, it's also true that Lightning has the bulk of the mind share and the bulk of the development manpower around it. And it's also true, probably, I think, that the kind of problems you have with Lightning about nailing down exactly what the protocol is, keeping up with development, figuring out the user experience aspects, figuring out what to do, like when there's bad network connectivity, when users connect to each other, partially do a channel and then drop off, like how quickly can you claw your coins back and stuff. I think that any solution that you would come up with is probably going to have to solve the same kind of problems, which means that if you as an investor are looking at this thinking, this is moving way too fast, I can't keep up with the development, these problems, I can't solve these problems, that is not within what I'm able to do as a businessman, then you probably want to either wait before entering the cryptocurrency space, or you want to find an aspect of the cryptocurrency space that is not so development focused. And this is basically a function of the network being so young. So Bitcoin technically started a little over 10 years ago. It was, I think, announced in 2008. In January 2009, there was the first block. Until September 2010, it was possible to steal anybody's coins. There was a bug in the system that would allow this. And it was so, nobody knew or cared about it, even enough to look at it enough to notice this kind of bug. And then this was quietly fixed in September 2010, and there's all sorts of fun. You can Google around for news articles about this at the time. And then for many years after that, there was very little technical innovation. There were a lot of people trying to come up with business models that really, on the face of them, didn't make any sense. So for example, there were many mining pools that were started simultaneously who had a business model centered around having 51% control of the network and then being able to censor transactions. And I remember in 2011, 2012, hearing this from a lot of different mining companies. And this is silly for multiple reasons. One is, of course, only one can have 51%. The second is, if anyone had 51%, the entire network is lost a dramatic amount of its value. And especially if your goal is to take 51% and then abuse the power that you therefore have, you are literally describing a system that you are intending to continually undermine the fundamental properties of.
No, you're shooting your own foot.
It just made no sense. Another business model that was popular around this time were things like Satoshi dice, where you would send them some coins and then they would flip a coin and they'd maybe send you some different coins back. Not even your own coins. At first they would send you different coins back, so you could double spend them and then steal your money. They changed it later so they'd give you your own coins back plus a bit, so now you couldn't double spend them and stuff. But this model also didn't really make sense because it was predicated on having basically your entire user base many transactions worth of space available in every single block. And no matter how you feel about what the block size ought to be, if your goal is to preserve the ability for users to verify individual blocks, you're not going to be able to increase the block size by more than a small multiple. You're not going to be able to increase it by hundreds or thousands of times, which is what you would need for any of these services to make sense. And that's just looking at whether these businesses make sense. It's not even looking at what the consequences for Bitcoin would be if we continue to have the inflation schedule that we have, but no fee market, right? If you have the fixed supply inflation curve of Bitcoin, which I think the majority of the Bitcoin community value very highly, and any attempt to change that would just be
Pieter Todd made a suggestion recently. Yes,
it would just be DOA. Somebody, it would be even worse than Luke Dasher's proposals for the block size. No one would even be talking about it.
Why are they making these proposals though? What do they see? Let me tell you what I think they see. I think they see possible future economic pressure hindering the block reward of miners, right? That's what I see. But why are they coming up with these things?
So, anyone can come up with a proposal. I think when Luke does stuff like this, is to give some structure and some context to his views on what the essential properties of Bitcoin are and how he would like to see Bitcoin go. I don't believe that Luke is creating these proposals with the intention of getting them accepted and brought into the network, because I can't believe that even he thinks that's realistic.
But he sees something.
He sees something, and he wants to communicate what he sees. Is the important thing. And he wants to give talks like the one on MCC. He wants to post things on Twitter and on the Bitcoin dev mailing list and make sure that view is heard. And to kind of move the Overton window towards maybe the block size already is too large for people to be validating. Most people don't agree with that view. I don't really agree with that view, although I appreciate the numbers he's come up with, and I certainly understand his argument. But in order for him to make that argument, he needs he needs to be very concrete. He needs to be very specific. And by making a proposal, he gets that.
But then again, none of us actually have a crystal ball to actually be 100% sure that this is going to be the case. Only hindsight is 2020, and it's almost like I am tempted to say, well, let's not guide this at all. Let's just let the free market take care of it, and let's allow miners to decide. That's kind of like the big blocker argument, right? Let the miners decide.
So letting the miners decide is not a free market approach. So let me try to give a bit of context for that statement. So when people talk about free market solutions, this word has a very nice cachet. It sounds very simple, right? It's just individual autonomy, freedom of interaction. I forget the term. Freedom of association is what I want. People say the word free market, and that's associated with freedom of association, which means I can interact with whoever I want as long as we agree, we exchange money. But the truth is that actually in practice, a free market comes with a very complicated incentive structure that's been honed throughout our legal system and our culture and our society. It includes such things as property rights, which are very nebulous. It's very difficult to pin down exactly what's meant by property rights. There are many simple examples, right? Well, let's pretend I paid for this coffee. I bought this coffee. It's my coffee. I have it. I can do whatever I want with it. It gets more complicated when it comes to things like land rights and land usage rights, and that's something I'm sure that a lot of your audience engages in very spirited debates about.
Of course, yeah.
Is what these things look like. How do you fit homesteading into a libertarian model? How do you fit court systems into a libertarian model? How do you fit police into a libertarian model?
Proof of work.
Right, and then, okay, so there we go. So even just with the things that we know and that we're familiar with in our day-to-day life, there are a lot of complicated things, and there are a lot of, like if you're really trying to nail down specifically what you meant by a free market, you come up with a very long, very noisy, like complicated border between like what constitutes property, what doesn't constitute property, how are contracts enforced, why is fraud not permissible, what about intervention into a free market to improve transparency or to restrict lying or to prevent withholding information. They're all like very
This
complicated.
is government intervention? Is this what you're talking about?
I'm talking about what it means to have a free market. And I'm not trying to make any specific statements. I'm trying to say that that's a complicated thing.
It's complicated because even when you ask a market anarchist, well, what would the market look like within an anarchist framework? The answer really is that there is no concrete answer other than human creativity and trust on what they would refer to would be like praxeological principles of human nature based on natural law, right?
Right, yeah.
Right.
And I've read the first 100 pages of Human Action.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I got distracted. So.
No, you just...
So with that bit of context,
Yeah.
now let's try to move this back to Bitcoin and look at the way that Bitcoin works. And then proof of work and mining and even like cryptographic sovereignty are all things that are radically different from anything that we're familiar with in the world. And then suddenly, as difficult it is to define property when we're talking about physical goods, and it's harder, like it becomes even harder, like I'm sure people have very strong opinions about like intellectual property. I'm not going to touch that quagmire. It gets even harder when you talk about cryptographic property, and I'm still not quite at mining, I'm just going to talk about crypto property in general. For example, if I have a secret key that controls $1,000 of Bitcoin, and I copy that key and I give it to like 10 different people, and so now any one of those 10 can spend the coins, who can it be said that actually owns the coins? Then, I mean, the answer to that probably would involve, well, I mean, if we had an explicit contract, then maybe that would give a clear answer, but if we didn't have an explicit contract, it's hard to say. What if I had 10 people and I put them into a Bitcoin script that allowed the coins to be sent by any 6 of us 10? That becomes even harder. Now I have something that's sort of similar to like a consortium or like a federation type contract, but then I've just encoded it in code. So like, does that count as law? How does that fit in the property framework? If I have my coins backed up by a key that's buried in a hole somewhere, and I also have a copy on my person, and I cross a border. Does that count as me carrying that money across the border? Do I have to declare that? I'm actually very curious about this. I'm not aware of any case law about this.
No, these are. I mean,
these are hard questions,
right? These are amazing questions that we are all wrestling with. And you know the interesting thing about this, Andrew, is that every crypto community, every crypto project has its own like cypherpunk future. So if BTC really takes over the world, then that world is going to be completely different than if Monero takes over the world, right?
Right.
So
let me quickly. I'd like to go more into that, but let me quickly try to wrap up my original answer.
Sure.
I was originally talking about mining incentive and how that interacts with a free market. So my point of diverging into what kind of complicated things go into defining a free market is that one way to, very, very general and meaningless way to think about a free market is an incentive structure that causes people to interact with each other freely. Okay? Somehow I am incentivized to convince you to make a trade with me rather than me like hiring goons to beat you up or like lying to you or tricking you or something like that. And so Bitcoin also is an incentive structure. And similar to the way that we institute a free market society or an economy, there's actually a lot of difficult decisions and a lot of different conflicting incentives that need to be considered when you define that. And if you create your incentive structure in certain ways, the result will actually not be free, even if you allow everyone to act according to their own individual autonomy within that structure. And so one example of this is, suppose that you were to let miners set the block size ratio. And it's actually kind of a difficult question to say exactly how that would play out, whether they would try to restrict it in order to increase the amount of free revenue they get on individual transaction, or increase it to try to increase the number of transactions that they're processing, or what sort of things that they might do. But what's critical to observe is that the miner incentives are very different from the incentives of ordinary users trying to transact with the system. In particular, miners are not so concerned about validation costs. In fact, miners kind of want the validation costs to increase, because when they mine a block, they know it's valid. And then they propagate that. It takes time for their competitors to validate it and check that it's valid. And so the more costly it is to validate a block, the more they are able to get a head start in mining on the next block. And so there's a centralization pressure that having larger or harder to verify blocks creates, and that may be something that miners would try to create. Miners also generally don't worry too much about their bandwidth costs or their CPU costs for validating blocks, because by kind of dint of how the industry works, to be successful, they have to be very well connected, and they have to have low latency connections to lots of people and lots of bandwidth. And then also their CPU costs, their power costs, kind of pale in comparison to the capital investment that they put into their hashing infrastructure. And so the trade-off that they're making between the ease of verifying blocks and like how many transactions can you come to a block, that's not really a trade-off for miners. Their incentive is basically just like increase it as much as they can. And so as a result, if you're looking at users of the system who want...
So you're saying, pardon me, so you're saying that miners have an incentive that would they have an incentive that would actually hurt the rest of the network? Is that what you're just alluding to?
Yep. So in the way that Bitcoin is designed today, there are various rules set in stone, one of which being that you cannot fit more than 4 million weight of transaction data into a given block. And the reason for that rule is in part to define the incentive structure that miners are operating in today. So if it is true that the incentives of miners in Bitcoin are antithetical to the rest of the network, that's a bug in Bitcoin. And actually, historically we saw an example of this.
This is 4 megabytes with SegWit allowing...
So 4 mega weight, which is not quite 4 mega. In principle, it's 4 megabytes, but it's actually a little bit less than that in practice. I think it's usually 2.1.
2 point something, yeah.
So we saw historically there's one example I'm aware of where miners' incentives were not aligned with the incentives of the rest of the system.
But was this? But this is within the contingencies of BTC as is now.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I was going to give an example about the ASIC boost mining optimization, where there was a way to hash much faster than the normal change your nonce hash mechanism that miners are supposed to use. Mm-hmm. This new way of hashing was patent encumbered, and there was some complicated movement of that patent that in the end turned out not to be too serious, because the patent ultimately came into the hands of somebody who opened it and allowed free usage. But there was concern for a while, correctly, because miners were incentivized directly to attempt to obtain exclusive intellectual property rights to using this optimization, and then using that to gain, to create centralization pressure and to gain an unfair advantage over other miners.
Yeah, that's something harsh that I think the crypto space is starting to feel with, like Craig Wright and BSV going after patents and so forth.
That's very, very concerning.
It's very concerning, and from an anarcho-capitalist perspective, obviously that's just weird.
Yeah.
And but then again, the law is there, and your adversary is going to use it against you. So wouldn't it be wise for people to just start patenting stuff, and start engaging in law within BTC as well to protect what's best for BTC, for Monero to do that as well? to like protect its sovereignty and its future?
Certainly, that's a cool question. There certainly things within the legal system that people should be doing. An example of this is that the Monero code base and the Bitcoin Core code base and all these code bases are released under the MIT license.
Right.
So in the U.S., actually in most of the world, when you write code, that's considered a written work, and you automatically have copyright over it. Other people are not allowed to download your code and read it and use it and so forth without your permission. So what you do in the open source world, in the free software world, is you release it under a permissive license. And the two most common kind of categories of licenses are something called like the GNU GPL, GNU Public License, where you say anybody's allowed to download the source code and use it, but if they change it, then and redistribute their changes, they are required to also contribute the source code. So it's kind of this viral property that like the code continues to be available and can't be encumbered. Another kind of category of licenses are those such as the MIT license that Bitcoin Core uses, which says anybody can download and use this core code unencumbered.
Yeah.
If they redistribute it, they are required to leave the attribution. They're supposed to leave that notice that says copyright, 2008 to 2019, the Bitcoin Core developers or whatever. And without these licenses, the Bitcoin source would then be encumbered by a more restrictive. It would not be possible for anybody to show up and use the network. The permissionless of the network would be undermined if it weren't for these forays into permissionlessness. With patents, things are a bit more difficult. I can talk a bit about what Blockstream does on this front.
Sure, yes, please.
Yeah. So Blockstream has a intellectual property strategy. There's a three-pronged strategy that its aim is to achieve exactly what you suggest, to basically use the legal system, which unfortunately we're stuck with, to ensure that intellectual property is freely available, unencumbered, like in any way. So the first prong of this is we have a patent pledge, where we have a promise, a legal promise to anybody using our technology that we will not take any form of patent aggression against them unless they first sue us in a way related to that specific property. Like we don't, even if they sue us about something unrelated, our promise does not allow us to take any aggressive IP action. And this promise also is binding to us and also any future holder of our intellectual property. And this is something that's been pioneered by companies like Red Hat, the Free Software Foundation, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Approve of this. People like to talk about how this hasn't been proven in court, but we aren't the first ones to do this, and we have this support. I'm not sure what more we could be doing on this front. And so that's the first part.
I mean, nChain has a bunch of patents pending right now.
Right. And
they have another company that I forgot the name of that they have a bunch of patents lined up under that entity as well. Yeah.
Right. And so by us having these patents, we first of all get material into the U.S. patent database, which is important. There's actually a fun bit of background that a lot of your viewers may not be aware of, is that when the patent office is doing research about the provenance of patents and whether it's actually lawful, they are not allowed to share any part of your patent with any third party. And third parties include online search engines. The patent office will not Google for your technology to see whether it exists. And so what we do when filing patents, and I, as the person at Blockstream who actually has the final okay on filing patents, I will, in the preamble, I'll just reference a whole bunch of stuff. I'll stick the Mimble Wimble white paper and stuff about Monero and random Bitcoin talk posts and type hereby incorporated by reference. And that pulls that material into the patent database that they are allowed to search. Even though it has nothing to do with my patent or anything, and it certainly doesn't make it part of the patent, all it does is put the text into the database. It's kind of a hack that we do there. So what nChain is doing is very concerning, certainly, and we help to undermine it in this way. And then also by having these patents exist, we make ourselves less vulnerable to being attacked by patent aggressors. So the first prong is just this patent promise. The second prong of our patent strategy is what's called the Inventor Patent Agreement. And so this is an agreement between Blockstream, the company, and all future patent holders, and the individuals listed as inventors on the patent. And what this says is that if Blockstream, in violation of the promise, independently of that, were to try to do anything aggressive, legally aggressive with its patents, were to try to sue anybody, then I, or whoever an inventor is, has the right to step in, interrupt the court case, give the victim a retroactive license to the patent, and just like completely kill the case. And so the individual inventors are allowed to have the ability to grant people licenses.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you for doing that.
And this is, thank you. So this is something that we got from Twitter. You can look up the Twitter inventor patent assignment. We tweaked it in a couple ways to tighten up the language. We were working with Kat Walsh of the of Wikimedia Foundation to help us go through. We got some of her friends and some of our friends at the EFF to take a look at this.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's the second prong.
That's awesome.
And then the third prong is this defensive patent pool. And I feel like this is maybe like the weakest prong, but I should mention it for completeness.
Yes.
And this is that we put all our patents into this entity called the defensive patent pool. Anybody's allowed to come join us. And then when they join, they're required to put their patents into the pool as well. And all members are contractually prevented from, every member is allowed to use every other member's patents. And so the hope when we created this was that we would have like an independent pool that many companies would join. And then basically, as long as you were in the pool, like patent law didn't exist for like at least between members of the pool. And then in practice, this didn't really take off the way that we expected it to. And I'm not sure how many companies are in the pool or how many patents are even in the pool. But that's the third prong, is this attempt to create this kind of DMZ and kind of simulate the GPL like viral if you use our stuff, you also have to make your stuff free kind of property for the GPL is what we were going for there.
Cool. All right, so let's add one last question. This has to do with like some FUD about possible future economic pressure, which is kind of valid to talk about, right?
Yep.
And it's the let's say that we're expecting that once the halving, once May 2020 comes, everyone is expecting for the price of BTC to rocket. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be great for miners. But if for some reason there's a panic rush or sell outside, to leave BTC, anything happens whatsoever, the fear is that the mempool is going to get backed up, and then the fee to get out is going to be extremely high. In other words, there is the extreme FUD of a chain death spiral, right? I'm sure you heard the term.
I've heard this term.
So yeah, what do you think of that when, let's say, people, there's manias, right? People buy and then they just keep buying without having any foresight, and then once those weak hands start getting scared, there's a mania, it gets started, and next thing you know, people want to sell, and then they panic rush, and then the mempool gets backed up, and then the transaction fees skyrocket, and what do we do? And then everyone's just really scared of that possible future. Yeah, please enlighten us.
All right, so I can say a few things about that.
Sure.
But first of all, I don't know why people expect the price to skyrocket. I know it did last time, and I don't understand why it did last time, and it did the time before, I think. I guess it's this pattern of control.
Well, that's the thing, man. It's like you can have logical and economic, your own arguments, but the masses, they don't have those arguments you do. You know what I mean? Or anyone else here?
Whatever happens.
The masses will think whatever they want to think. I mean, there's no way of predicting the way they're going to think. So, well, the meme tossed around is that, come 2020, when the block reward halves, it's going to remind everyone of the scarcity of the limited supply of Bitcoin, and this price is going to skyrocket. It makes logical sense, right? But
so the other thing I can say about, so let me talk more generally about these chain death spirals. So Bitcoin has a couple limits on how fast the difficulty adjusts. We call these rails. It's a 4x in each direction. The difficulty cannot jump by more than 4 times in a single adjustment, even if the blocks are coming at more than 4 times the speed. Similarly, the difficulty cannot go down to less than a quarter of what it is, even if blocks are coming at less than a quarter. And historically, Bitcoin has never hit those rails. For the first year or 18 months of its existence, it stayed pinned, there's a third rail here. It stayed at difficulty 1, and it's not allowed to go below difficulty 1. And I kind of dragged along for a while. Sometimes there were multiple blocks. At difficulty 1, there were multiple blocks, and nobody was even running miners. Once it left that rail and sort of took off, it has never hit those rails at any point. And historically, there have been a lot of pretty serious fee events caused by external pressures. So there's not only issues when there's market mania and lots of people are moving to and from exchanges and between exchanges and stuff, which we've seen before. That's one thing that causes fee pressure. There also have been several times in Bitcoin's history when there were random companies with a lot of VC funding running businesses that depended on just producing an enormous amount of transactions, and often in very inefficient ways. There have also been a lot of companies, especially large exchanges, for whom the transaction fees are basically noise to them, and so we're creating not quite deliberately inefficient transactions, but they weren't prioritizing making their transactions more efficient. And a company that continues to do something similar today is BitNex at 9 a.m. Eastern, I think, every day, sends out a batch transaction. And you see a very predictable fee spike every single day.
Oh, wow.
It's very silly.
Yeah.
And so one thing that might, and then more generally, actually, you see the fees go up during bankers' hours every weekday.
Hilarious.
So if you're a Bitcoin user who's worried about high fees and can wait a little bit,
Yeah, just wait.
wait for a Sunday morning.
That's awesome.
That's when fees are cheap. But despite all of this crazy irrational fee behavior, we've never seen a change. As I said, we've never hit these rails. And my feeling is that just seeing like a lot of market mania and price madness, I don't see that causing the kind of mempool pressure that would cause a death spiral, especially when there are so much of the transaction volume is happening between large institutional holders such as exchanges, for whom the fees are basically noise, even at quite high rates. It's basically noise for them. So I don't see something as minor as price insanity related to the halving being enough to cause this kind of spiral. And then also, I can make a more nebulous economic argument that I actually don't think these spirals are a real thing that would happen. Like basically, as soon as people start leaving the network because it's too expensive, then the fees go down, right? Because it's an option. And then finally, like ultimately, eventually, like the back pressure recedes, right? I mean, the price craziness will pass, and then the fee pressure will reduce, and then fees will go down.
Yeah, the market calibrates.
And,
That's expected,
exactly.
Right?
The market will recover.
It's just the movement within the network itself. That's the transaction throughput. I think it's a problem here, where we would have to rely on the Lightning Network quite a bit. So the worst case scenario would be not having the Lightning Network at the place where we would want it to be the breathing room, right, of transaction throughput, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Lightning will help this quite a bit because it allows people to transact individually, especially in small amounts that would be like very small compared to the fee of an on-chain transaction. Lightning will make that possible without worrying about the congestion on the chain, except in like cases of like everyone attempting to leave Lightning at the same time or something like that. And what was I going to say? I'm blanking again. Something else about the fee pressure. I wanted to expand a little bit on my comment about the fee like going up during weekends.
Yes.
That seems to me like there is a market opportunity for somebody to invent a fee derivative, because when you have this very predictable price movement, I don't know how technically to do it. But I feel like somebody should come up with that. It seems like within the realm.
There are so many possibilities within. See, that's the thing, is that a lot of what's helping BTC out is just that mindset of an entrepreneurship, which is like allowing the chain to breathe with adaptability and liquidity that is extrinsic to the throughput that happens within the network, right?
So if fee derivatives existed, then as an individual transactor, you would be able to hedge against fee events by also owning basically like a fee future or something like that.
Yeah, listen up, entrepreneurs. We just gave you gold.
And
wow.
And you can imagine somebody like producing a synthetic that was a combination of a Bitcoin and a fee future or something, and doing this in a trustless manner, like very difficult. At least the Bitcoin side is easy enough. You give someone a Bitcoin, but you can imagine creating synthetic Bitcoin fee pressure or Bitcoin fee pressure token, I don't know what you might call it, a fee future, and then you have a Bitcoin whose value, or a Bitcoin proxy whose value under ordinary circumstances is basically the price of Bitcoin, but under extreme circumstances like that, you are hedged against those kind of events.
This could probably even work as a side chain with like with that. I mean, I know you guys have Liquid, right?
Yep.
would Liquid, Liquid, and then there's Paul Storks's drive chains as well, which is different than your side chains. They could probably do that. That would be great. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So Liquid is a multi-asset blockchain. You can certainly issue an asset. If you wanted to issue a fee derivative on Liquid, the way you would do it is basically by defining a fee contract using like ordinary financial contracts, and then issuing a proxy for that contract on the blockchain and trading it on the blockchain. So Liquid does not have the technological capabilities to actually connect your asset to the Bitcoin fee market, but you could do that using traditional financial tools and use Liquid to give your users the ability to transact these derivatives and to bundle them along with Bitcoin.
Wow, rock on, Andrew. Thank you so much for your time. I know we can keep talking forever, but
no, we're at the top of the hour.
We're at that. Literally, we made it exactly an hour. Andrew, I really appreciate this. I think one of the things that hurt us the most within crypto was the fact that the community stopped communicating.
I agree.
And even as someone that came from I was more partial during the whole thing with the big blocker stuff. It's something that we need to get back to, because and that's something let's just one last thing.
Sure.
Whether you're a big blocker or a small blocker, something that I've noticed throughout the years is that we're all united by Monero. We all come back to Monero.
We all love privacy technology.
We all love Monero. Monero is the thing that we come back to. Like, the only ones that maybe don't come back to Monero are people in BSV, right? Because now they're advocating for radical transparency, and now the term.
Oh my goodness! What a bizarre pivot.
I know, and it's going. The new term is surveillance, not surveillance. That's overseeing. Surveillance. So surveillance.
Oh Lord.
Which would require, if it's actually ever implemented correctly, require that everyone have open source blockchain analytics to surveil one another.
Yep.
Right.
That's absolutely what they're saying.
But
madness.
But will that? That would be very. In my opinion, that would be very hard to get something comparable to match the state budget of any government, right? Why Monero? You're at a Monero conference right now. You gave a great talk today.
Thank you.
You are core developer in Blockstream. BTC's your baby.
BTC's my baby.
But here you are. And at the same conference, you can see someone like Roger Ver walking around because he loves Monero too.
Yep.
That's
like, he's not here though.
No, he's not here right now.
Come to the US.
But the thing is,
in Denver.
I think he can. I don't know, but whatever.
I don't know. I don't keep up with it.
Who cares? Yeah. Anyways, the thing is, Monero has always been a place that kept uniting us as a community. Isn't that weird? It's almost as if like all the old school Bitcoin before the forks, before all of this, like we still all hang out here within Monero. Why is that, and what brings you here?
So I have a lot of friends in the Monero space, certainly personally. Denver is not too far from where I live in Austin, Texas. It's easy to come up here. The thing that Monero does is that it values privacy over basically any other goal that a blockchain might have. And that means that it's very willing to deploy new cryptography. It's very willing to change quickly to deploy this new technology. It's willing to do so sometimes at the expense of user experience, sometimes at the expense of scalability, sometimes there are many different trade-offs that you have to make. But what this means is that as someone trying to develop cryptographic technology and trying to deploy it and see how it works in the real world, Monero is a perfect sandbox for that kind of thing. And they've been very communicative with us. So like Monero deployed confidential transactions. So confidential transactions was actually first developed for Liquid by Blockstream.
Yeah, it was Greg Maxwell, right?
That was Greg Maxwell, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was first deployed on the Elements Alpha sidechain, which is kind of a precursor to Liquid. And then I believe the next people to adopt it after our Elements sidechain, Monero adapted it so that it would work with ring CT, that it would work with their ring signatures. And then they had confidential transactions deployed on an independent blockchain. It was not this federated model. It was not a test network in the way that Alpha was, where it was really like literally using Bitcoin testnet and having valueless coins and stuff. Mm-hmm. And throughout this kind of R&D, the Monero folks have learned. There's a lot of hard lessons that you learn developing cryptography in the real world. And the Monero community has always been very transparent about that and willing to trade ideas and to exchange things and to help learn from each other. And then also it's a very friendly community.
Very friendly and very pure. In a sense, it's almost like they even forego monetizing for the sake of giving you like peer-reviewed code, like the Monarujo project, for example, right? That's it's a project based on volunteers and donations.
Yep.
Which is awesome.
Yep, and we've seen earlier talks. There have been a lot of talks in this conference, especially the last 2 sessions, largely about the legal infrastructure around cryptocurrencies and private technology, and the social and the cultural impacts of these things. And these are topics run by entities such as Coin Center, who is a political group pushing for cash-like policy, trying to prevent a shift into a cashless, all transactionally surveilled kind of society. We've seen talks by multiple lawyers and activists and people who are using this kind of technology to try to affect positive social change in the world. And there have been no talks today about people trying to monetize this technology or trying to launch an ICO or trying to do some sort of weird securities game or anything.
Well,
like that.
you know what? The thing is that I agree with you. There shouldn't be any scams. But we still need capitalism, right? I mean, I'm a capitalist 100%. I don't expect people to run off of charity, right? People need to capitalize, monetize. We need market drivers, right?
No question, no question. But to the extent that Monero has an open and welcoming community and is easy to collaborate with, it helps to have that open, collaborative culture, and that's what I'm trying to emphasize here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Andrew, pleasure. And so where can people find out more about you and follow you and what you're doing?
That's a good...
Get a hold of you if they need maybe you spark some entrepreneurial interest and maybe want to talk to you about something you mentioned.
So I'm afraid I'm not on Twitter, which I guess is where everybody is these days. You can email me, andrew@blockstream.com. You can find me on IRC if you want, if you're crazy. Andy Toshi on Freenode. I'm on Bitcoin and some Bitcoin-related channels and Monero Research Labs. You can find my GitHub account. I mean, I guess you can't contact me that way.
Right.
I mean, that's basically, probably if you want to get in touch with me, email is the best way to do it, I think. Or find me in Austin, Texas. Go to the Third and Noises, the bar called Trifecta. I'll be there.
All right. So you guys heard everything that we needed to hear. I mean, we can talk about this for days. Wow. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Again.
Cool.
Yeah.